Good morning, everyone, and welcome to Sunday Forum at St. Luke's Episcopal Church. We're so really happy that you're with us, and I am thrilled to have as my conversational partner a person who is a friend and a teacher. One of the most durable, enriching relationships I have in my life. Her name is the Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams. I'll talk in just a minute about her books and what she's established, and she and I will have a conversation about her work, and then we want to get to the heavy questions of the day, which we've been posing to all of these national thought leaders for the last 2 months. But for right now, let me simply introduce you all to the Reverend Angel Kyodo Williams. Welcome, Angel.
Thank you so much. It is so good to see you, and I'm really honored to be here with your community and congregation.
Thank you very much, Angel. It's really wonderful to have you. Let me say a few things about you and then ask you to kind of fill that out. Reverend Angel is the author of 2 books, Radical Dharma, Talking Race, Love, and Liberation, and Zen and the Art, and Being Black, Zen and the Art of Living with Fearlessness and Grace. And we're going to come back and talk about all those things. She is a Zen Buddhist priest. She is the second woman of African descent, recognized in the Japanese Zen lineage. In 2020, she began the first annual Great Radical Race Read. And she is the founder of the Center for Transformational Change. And I am, let me go there, and then there are a couple of other things I want to say about her work, and then we'll talk about her and me. But Angel, did I get all that right?
Yep. We are it's the Center for Transformative Change, and
Thank you.
And everybody says transformational. I think we like the word transformational, and now I think maybe I should have used that word. But it is transformative change, and now we're actually not a physical center anymore. So we just say we're a transformative change, because we are, like many people, virtual and distributed now.
Oh, indeed, we are virtual and distributed. So the next thing I wanted to quote from a comment you made when you were about to go and preach in 2 Christian services, which reveals both your profundity and your playfulness. And I love both of those things about you. You said, queer Buddhist priest preaching in Christian churches. This is what #New America looks like, people welcoming each other as we are is love and liberation. I thought that was a marvelous summary of what I know about you.
Well, thank you, Instagram, or wherever it is that was. It's like a special social media brain. And yes, it felt very much like that. You know, there was a succession of invitations from Christian spaces, and Buddhist and queer and a priest and all of those things. It certainly wasn't what I grew up in, and so it also had a real quality of healing for me to have those invitations extended, and also the experience of being there in that way.
Yeah. Another part of the richness of your spiritual presence and energy is that you know a lot from the inside out about Christianity, American Christianity. You had a moment there in your own life. Do you mind talking just a little bit about that spiritual journey of yours?
Yeah, I actually one of the sermons that I gave was at Howard Thurman's historic church there at Howard University, and I say to people that for the most part, especially at my age, all Black folks are steeped in Christianity, maybe unless they were raised Muslim. So there's a possibility, but for the most part, we're all steeped in it. It doesn't matter what tradition that we might have, found ourselves in, whether we're situated in yoga or Buddhism or the Sikh faith or anything else. So and that's because the Black community is steeped in Christianity in its formation, really, and its formation and its salvation from the scourge of racialization and enslavement, and having generated an entire, I want to say, path that brought forth Christ's words and Christ's path as a lover. And so I can't avoid, I don't think any of us can avoid being steeped in it in some way. And I also had, the periods of time in my life early on where I was, in the choir and, had to have my church hat on and all of the things. And so, I know the culture well from my own lived experience. And so I feel, very much as a result of also these later experiences that have uprighted some of the failings for me of my relationship to the church. Those things have been uprighted in ways by having, gorgeous kin that are pastors and preachers, such as yourself, that has given me a real new lens into, all of what Christianity can be when it's situated in love.
Oh, that's powerful. I'm still taking that in, because we're going to get to this in a few minutes about how deeply disoriented I have been around the insurrection on January 6th. And we'll unpack that a little bit. But it is related to and kind of vibrates with a form of Christianity that needs to be uprighted. So I just want to note that right now. We'll come back to it and go more deeply into it. Before we do that, just still in the service of introducing you to these people who worship at St. Luke's in downtown Atlanta, and also a growing number of friends from a kind of an international environment. I thought it would really be good to talk about the fact that you and I co-led an interfaith pilgrimage to southern Utah, to Pando. And Wesley, my dear colleague, is putting up some photos of you and me and of Pando right now. And I'm simply reminding everyone that Pando is this 106-acre root ball that is one plant and is a beautiful symbol of the oneness of us all. And because you and I had met at a Richard Rohr conference and had really made a connection there, and one that was of trust and one of durability and one of candor, which was so enriching for me, we invited all these people. You helped, really make it happen. And here we were on a bus, and there we were. During the course of that, Angel, you talked about how what Pando represents is a value and a concept that appears in the Buddha's teaching and preaching a great deal. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, so I think we talk about oneness, and for many of us that are engaged in justice, it can express itself coming from many people that are not doing, what we call the work, as a bypass, something that glosses things over, and still I come directly out of a deep relationship to the teachings that live inside of the broad Buddhist teachings, including the historic Buddha, that understands the way in which we are arise as a multiplicity out of this absolute oneness, so that our oneness is absolute, but the relative reality for us, just as in Pando, there are some of those tree shoots that live in the sun, and and they have a beautiful nourishment and nutrients, and there's some that live in the shade, and they struggle, and they're challenged, and one of the things that we learned while we were there, they are preyed upon. And so this both things can be true simultaneously, and that is very much the notion of the absolute reality and the relative reality, that there is both absolute relative, and that they coexist, and that one doesn't allow us to our connection with one doesn't allow us to bypass the other. It works the other way around as well, that we are intimately related and connected, and really of one, is the driving force of my I can say here, faith, that we can repair and bring upright many of the things that seem to have gone awry, because I think I trust the essential goodness of our nature.
And there's the relative reality.
Yeah.
That we don't act as though we're one.
Yeah, that is exactly right.
So that's where I want to ground the rest of our conversation. I'm so hungry to hear from you about what you've been going through, thinking and feeling and meditating about and teaching about, particularly since George Floyd's murder and Breonna Taylor's murder. I heard you on radio commenting on the protests that have come out of that. And if I heard you correctly, you were saying they are of a different nature and they are a different force, and that you were at that point feeling hopeful. And then it's almost as if hopeful about a shift. And it's almost as if right on the heels of that was this horribly contentious election, and then a debated presidential outcome, and the absence of a peaceful transition of power. And this insurrection finally followed on the heels of what probably was not a surprise to you, but I must admit, it really surprised me that it turned out to be a convention of white supremacists and of Christian nationalists. So that's the context, that's the frame by which I'm posing these questions to you and the other thought leaders with whom we've been having a conversation. Where are we now? And where do we go from here? So we've got another 30 minutes to unpack all of that. Go to any facet you want. And I just need to say that one of the marvelous moments in my entire life, was when you were on a panel with Richard Rohr, and he had given an answer to a question, and you said, "Father Richard, may I complicate your answer, please?" So, I mean, you know that you and I have as a contract that I welcome your complicating my thinking at any moment, Angel. So those are the questions, my friend.
Thank you. Well, I just have to, before I go, I just have to say, for the sake of myself as well as the community of people that will see this, that after that conference, or somewhere actually during that conference, I was mulling around and looking for a place to sit with my partner, and I saw this man, big man, big white man, and he made a kind of a beeline towards me. I was sitting in the chair to sign books or something. And the level of presence and generosity and familiarity, the sense of familiarity that comes from not that. And I know there are Black folks here that y'all can understand that familiarity, that you're like, hey, you're getting too familiar here. but the familiarity that expressed a confidence in love and connection is one of my most profound moments. And I haven't had an opportunity to say that to you. The way that you approached me, the sense of ease and grace and lack of self-consciousness. That was something that I just had not experienced very much at all in my life in the body of a white male. And so that was really profound and beautiful and healing. And I was I'm just like, who is this guy? And, we just kept finding each other from there.
Yeah.
So I'm just honored to be able to be found and refound by you again and again. So thank you for that.
Thank you, Angel.
Yeah. So having said that, I want to say it surprises me that you're surprised.
Yeah, I know.
I know. And I mean, and I know it, right? Like, I know that this is the way in which, not just white-bodied folks, but especially white folks, have been induced into a kind of dream state about what this country is. And so what I most think about what happened is that is what we created. And so how could it not happen? Like, that and I don't mean that the 45th president created it. That's just a channel that person was a channel for what has always been here. I actually appreciate the clarity. I appreciate clarity in all things. The murkiness and the muddiness of the pretense that is not what has been the underpinning of this nation since its inception has always been, I think for me, the most disturbing thing, because it's a kind of, not only do we have to have double consciousness as Black folks and as people, Indigenous folks, but we are then kind of called to double check and question our own perception, like our felt and embodied perception of the danger that exists here, of the deception that exists here, of the disconnect that the what comes out of people's mouths and the reality, the felt reality that we live in our bodies, on a day-to-day basis. And every so often, something will come about and rise up in the national conscious in such a way that we ourselves are called to remember that we may have, for a moment, I like to say, drank the Kool-Aid.
Yeah.
And thought it was, changing in some meaningful way. And the fact is that things are changing, of course, but they're changing. Everybody's changing. It's not like just this one piece is changing. And so, sure, Black and brown folks, have more access to wealth, but exponentially, that's why, white-bodied people have access to exponentially more wealth. And so, comparatively speaking, the whole thing is rolling forward, and there are changes in that way. But the disparity is actually increasing rather than decreasing. And so, the tension of that, right? The tension of all the gains that appear to be made by brown and Black folks, by immigrants and so on, that for me is always there. It's like the absolute and the relative, it is not a linear in the way that you communicated it, like, look, there's hope. And now, wow, just when we had hope, there's this thing. It's like, no, that was going on all while the possibility of hope was going on. It was right there. And in fact, I believe that, in the same way that the pandemic had very much to do with creating the conditions that allowed many people, especially white folks, to feel themselves and to feel the danger, to feel the disconnect, to feel the truth of what we have been and what this nation has been in regards to, disregard of Black life and violence and aggression against Black people with impunity. So I think the pandemic created the conditions for that, because there is enough space, I'm coming out of a tradition that's contemplative, right? For there to actually be a felt experience, of like, of how painful and egregious and against life that act is, and then make the connection, backwards to like, oh, and that's actually the same as Breonna Taylor, and that's actually the same as, as Michael, and it's the same, and it's the same as Emmett Till, like, right? It's just like roll it back, and it's the same as Martin, it's the same as Malcolm, and it's the same energy, and so we can feel the energy, and I think that is where my hope comes from. My hope is not that I think, my hope is situated in the fact that I believe that that we are essentially good, and that we have had the corrupting force of the United States of America and all of its capitalist and enslavement of peoples in all different forms, formally and informally, as the core operating system. So my hope is placed in the trust of human nature. And so that the quiet, once we get to feel ourselves, whether we feel ourselves in church, whether we feel ourselves in meditation, whether we feel ourselves in prayer, that if we can allow ourselves to feel ourselves, right, if we allow ourselves to actually feel what is happening, what is true, what is real, that actually we'll go, no. So that's what the hope is, right? Is that and then we had that space, that the conditions created a mass time out, for the busyness and distraction, so that people could feel themselves, so that they could say no, not because they took a training or, went to a race conversation or read a book or, got some history under their belt, because of the actual human embodied experience of this is a no, right? This is against life. And a very thick underpinning of the entire system has always been certain that this nation belongs to them, and I wouldn't argue that, Ed. I mean, that's been a part of our conversation, is that I actually wouldn't argue that the America that has been is the America that has belonged to exactly these people that got together and, as you said, made a convention of white supremacy and white Christian nationalists to assert the truth that this country is theirs, and that seeing their own people, their own race of people begin to tune into themselves and recognize what is going on and push back. I think that is actually the ground that's the foundation for the insurrection, even more so than what a president was saying. Certainly it was stirred, but I don't think that stirring could have even come together as formidably as it did without the angst and frustration and the many hundreds now of years of pent-up frustration about the fact that Black people are free, that we choose to be free, that the immigrants come and continue to, as it has always been, to find their place in the society and are choosing to thrive. So all of those things.
All of those things. And all of those things. And that's more. So I want simply to acknowledge that systemic racism is a real body of water in which all of us swim. And for white-bodied people, there is a somnolence that can happen of falling asleep and knowing when there was an eruption that all of this was not of God, not of life, not of love, and then falling back asleep and then waking back up. All the while, there's no falling asleep for people of color, of color skins and bodies who every day are leaving the house with the presumption of dangerousness and the presumption of trouble, to quote Brian Stevenson, with which they're living. And all of that is going on at the same time. And I just simply want to acknowledge that the power of systemic racism is that for certain people, it is relatively easy to fall back out of awareness of all of that until an eruption comes. I also wanted to acknowledge and just underscore that this systemic racism we're talking about has the ability for certain people to be unaware of lynching and how horrible that was. A lot of Jim Crow life and how horrible that was, and mass incarceration, and on and on and on. And I have dear friends who are struggling with the reading material. We're saying, okay, we have to read this. We have to watch these documentaries. Oh my God, Ed, I didn't know that. And so one of my jobs is to say, right, and we have to know that. Having said all that, I guess now I do want you to well, let me stop and see what kind of response you have to that before we go on with another set of questions.
You know, I think that I think people have to know, and I think that people have to get it in their bodies. I think that one of the things that remains persistently problematic about the way that we navigate race is that race is a Black people's problem. Race is a people of color's problem, and white people have to learn about it. And it's like, and that's not it. That actually reifies power. That reifies assumptions of power and positional location. And so, yes, true that the circumstances, these are not circumstances where white-bodied people could, ignore or fall asleep, just because they're special, because they're white. It's because it was by design. This is carefully crafted and continuously tweaked so that there is a systematic induction of white-bodied people into this somnambulance that you're talking about, into this, and I want to say like a disembodiment that allows for the allows white people to tolerate the intolerable, right? And so what I think about what's important is to understand that this is a design, because when we just say, oh, white folks are, they can just forget, it has the little kind of, it's like the privilege thing. It's like, oh, privilege is a good thing, and now you all want my privilege. And it's like, no, I don't want that privilege, because you have that so-called privilege is actually unearned benefits. And the cost to white-bodied people is this disembodiment that actually has people checked out of reality that's right there. It's not just because you don't have to, it's like an actual dismissal of the reality that is present and has been present and has been here, and subjects people to selective memory, to selective acknowledgement, to selective awareness. It's as if you were standing in a room and you just completely cannot see. It renders you blind to something that's right here. So the don't know is insufficient. It's not just this like, oh, I need to know this information. You need to get it in your body, and you need to be in an inquiry and an interrogation to how could this have been the case that I have not known, right? And when I say that, because now you're not going to look at Black people and brown people and go, oh, I feel so bad for them, but you're going to say, what is going on in my life? What systems and structures exist in my life that maintain this propensity towards slumber, towards forgetfulness? And that's what I feel that has been missing, is that we keep even addressing the fact and realities of racialization in a way that continues to coddle white-bodied people and locate them in some position of, once again, some soft ignorance. You just didn't know. This is egregious. This is a pain on your body too. That says somehow this whole thing was happening for a couple hundred years, and you didn't get it. Your people didn't get it. Your parents, so maybe somebody participated, maybe someone didn't, but there is really something to be said for that kind of, for having been a part of that reality, right?
Indeed.
And that the place to look for it is not for like, how can you help somebody else and, and pour them, but rather what has happened to me, what has happened to my people. And especially as Christians, and how has that been able to sleep alongside, my faith.
Indeed. And it is by, I'm wanting to underscore your point about it is by design. And so when people fall back to sleep, that is what they're supposed to do by this formula, by this design, which raises the question. And it's related to another question I was going to pose, but it raises the question, what is the ideal design? We're not in the ideal design now. Privilege is not the ideal design. Our privilege that white-bodied people have, into which they can invite people of color. We need a different design, right? Am I getting
Absolutely.
it right?
Yes, absolutely. And, and I want to say that that's sometimes hard also for Black and colored folks to hear, because, much of this capitalistic reductionism is that, we're valued by proximity, by our proximity to white prescribed culture, right? And so we have more value by getting closer and closer to white ideals and value systems and valuation. And so that the answer is not, let us as Black and brown people, the people that have been denied access and so on, get more of that's not the answer, is also devastating to us, because that's what we've been taught, right? If we can kind of like slough that other stuff off and, shine ourselves up and get a little bit closer, to the man. If we get a little bit closer, buy the stuff, get the objects, the material gains, the wealth, the so on, then, and we can see, that the wealth doesn't protect us. It certainly adds some, some little buffer of insulation, here and there to the more, the stronger cuts, but it doesn't prevent us. And it actually maintains that system, right? It maintains the system. And so what we have is this sort of temporary entrance into a club, rather than the full-hearted, full-throated belonging and unmitigated belonging, unfettered belonging that is our birthright as the human species, and should be our birthright as citizens of nations. If you believe in nation states, I'm not completely sold on that, but while we're doing this model, I'll just say should be our birthright as citizens. Should be our birthright, in fact, in this particular country, as the many peoples of the world that have come, because the only ones of us that are not immigrants to this country are First Nations people and Native Americans, and so that is also something that we have to reconcile with, that there's a way that we're also complicit. So the ideal design for me is to deconstruct it and to reconstruct it in a time space that is actually able to hold the complexity of who we are as a country now, and with a vision of equity for all of us, including women, which was not the case when the Constitution and everything was put together, and the ideals and so much of these systems. I mean, we have institutions that literally predate the country, right? The formation of the country. And so what do you think is embedded in those systems? What do you think? And right, it's like embedded in those systems. So and so much of what is unfair, while we, in many ways look towards the Constitution as, the possible way out. I believe the way that we relate to Constitution is aspirational. And there's nothing wrong with aspiration, but as long as we have a document that is the guiding force of the nation, that by someone's interpretation, by a set of 5 people's interpretation, can relegate any body, any being, to subhumanities, to subvalue, to lacking of essential rights to health and wellness and thriving, it is the wrong document. It's the wrong document for me. And so I think that the ideal design begins with, I don't want to say what I think, what it actually is, but I think it begins with a reconciliation, a reckoning with that we don't have the right design, and a reconciliation that says that we're here now together, and we have to come up with something, a structure of governance, of representation, and guiding principles that include all of us, including, with all of the misfortune, those of them that would have it different. It actually has to include them, and I don't know what that all looks like, but it does have to include who is here. We don't have a way to throw people to.
I remember once you and I were talking, and you said, and we have to deal with the reality that these documents did not envision me at all. And we need founding documents that we all are envisioned in, and that we all create together. Did I remember that correctly?
Yeah, absolutely. And that's what I talk about. That's what the hashtag New America is.
Yeah.
Is this idea, which is, many people would find, and you can see if you had a moment of, that, like, how deeply it's in you, right? Like how deeply it's in you that this is somehow, something that is, almost godlike. It's like it can't be put asunder.
Indeed. Well, 2 real quick anecdotes that I think about in a great deal. One is that I've heard about another family, and it's a white skinned family in the South, and the grandmother is in the process of dying with dementia and probably Alzheimer's, and her systemic racism is in her so deeply that she seems to have no choice but to treat the people who are caring for her in a derogatory, dehumanizing way. And that being so ingrained in someone, I mean, we're going to get to in a minute how you and I and all humanity can have some kind of transformative change, as you talk about. And then the other is a new friend of mine here in Atlanta saying how angry she stays at how much she's having to relearn. She's just having to relearn left and right. And I think that this new world that you, Angel, are so effectively calling us toward is going to have to be an acknowledgement of how really tough and deeply ingrained all of this is in people, as well as how much work of relearning there is going to have to go on.
Yeah, one of the things that I said, it's not work. And one of the challenges is we say it's work. And I said to my dear brother, Resma Menicum, it's labor. It's toil. It's toil. And that's what brother, John Lewis talked about when he said good trouble, right? Because labor is toil, and toil means trouble, right? It's like something's trouble. It means, so work, we have like a beginning, a middle, and we expect it to end. So when we relate it to as work, there's this sense of like, it ought to be over. I should check the boxes, do the things, read the thing, and and then it will fix itself, or I'll be done. It's actually labor, and we have to see it as good labor. We have to see it as good trouble. It's good toil. It's something that we put our backs into And we expect that we are going to continue to work with this and see it as our own unfolding, which is why it's so important that people really understand that this is it's a practice of one's own liberation. This is not on behalf of someone else. It's great if it benefits other people, and it will. And of course I want that, but I think one of the most clear things that has come to me from my work in Radical Dharma is that at the end of the day, if people are not understanding things, ultimately that it is for their own benefit. Even when we talk about oneness, right? We do things out of oneness. It's we're seeing ourselves in there. That when it really hits the fan, if we see that we have the possibility of an exit, then most of us, except the saints, such as yourself, Ed, will run for the door, and we can't afford that.
No.
So we have to be honest with people, and we have to tell them that they have skin in the game. They always have.
My heart is swelling and warming, because when you use the word labor as an alternate to the word work, it also carried the nuance of labor in childbirth.
Mm-hmm.
Arundhati Roy wrote this amazing essay in October called "The Pandemic as Portal."
Mm.
And so I've been using that as a mantra.
Mm.
And another way of thinking about it is all of the viruses that we are trying to vaccinate against right now, from the virus of coronavirus to systemic racism to on and on and on, that we need to be in a kind of a birth canal, and that we know that we are laboring for a new world.
Yes.
That's what turns me on.
Yeah, we are laboring. And I want to offer this, and the challenge that exists when we talk about systemic racism is that it lives out there somewhere.
Yeah.
And I use the term racialization to connote that something was done, and that it has a process to it. And someone did something, just like we don't say, someone was a slave, they were enslaved, right? There isn't just slavery, there was enslavement. It is to say, so it's not just there's race race is a construct, but it's not inherently a problem all by itself, that there's this, but there's racialization, and the process that undergirds racialization connotes meaning and impact that each of us have to navigate. And if it's just out there somewhere, I think that I'm afraid that we will miss it. And that's what gives me hope too, because I know that when people turn to it, when they understand it as labor, and they enter into these conversations and this effort that we bring to this returning again and again, in the same way that we labor with people that we love. We labor in relationships, we labor over gardens, we labor over everything that is, that we're bringing to fruition, out of our effort, which is quite different than creation, which is something out of nothing. And we're working with what we have. We're working with our challenges. We're working with our missteps. We're working with our ignorances. We're working with the pain of coming to realization that we don't know what we ought to have known. And so there's a beauty in labor rather than creation in this instance, because it allows us to bring the whole of ourselves to this. Right. And it allows us to also do it side by side, because we can labor side by side.
I love it. We've got to wrap up, but I don't want to leave without. So there are so many levels on which we have to work, or invited to work. I'm sorry, we're invited to labor.
Yes.
Oh, and speaking of, you're helping me with language. Thank you for saying what you've just said about racialization as distinct from systemic racism, because that may be why it's not kind of catching. It's not getting traction. You know, Maria Shriver talked with us that night about things not having traction when we had dinner with her. And systemic racism may not be getting traction because it is a way of thinking out there. And so in light of the time, you and I will forever find one another and have more conversations. I do want to remember and recall back to the conversation with Richard Rohr that night. And he was talking about how important contemplation is. And you said, again, I love the way you love people when you address them and then lower the boom. It's not lowering the boom, it's turning on the light. Let me put it that way, Angel. You said, Father Rohr, I've known people personally who have sat in contemplation for 30 years and they're still assholes. And so then you and I had a conversation about what is it that we want in our contemplative lives, in our sitting lives, that calls for this transformative change that you embody in your life's work is all about, and that will lead to a new design, our creating a new design.
It's remembering, it's choosing to remember. And so we can contemplate just what is as it is. And since that's been presented to us, we've inherited it. We don't even know where it comes. We can just take it for granted. And so there's a choice to remember more deeply. And when I say remember, it's like remember to remember, to make ourselves whole again by the truth of information that's cognitive and knowledge based, by the truth of reconnecting to our body, so choosing to be embodied and to really interrogate the culture of distraction that has so many of us caught, so that we're not in our bodies. And if we're not in our bodies, I said to someone once, they were saying, so and so is doing, with some people, somebody that had been caught doing another thing, pants down kind of thing. And I said, well, you can't hold them accountable, because nobody can be held accountable for something that they can't be responsible for. And they can't be responsible for it if they can't feel it. If they can't, you cannot commit someone to responsibility for something if they can't actually feel themselves responsible. And if you're not in your body, you can't be responsible for pretty much anything. And I think that's why we have such flagrant bypassing of all sorts of things that you would just think, wow, as a human being, how could you? Well, if you're not there, that's how you could, and you can read a Bible, you could read sutras and text and Torah and Quran and not be there. They're empty words passing through this shell, and there's nothing to act upon it. There's no divine connection to the earth, to truth, to God, to Allah. There's no connection so that you can act upon. And then, so then all you are is this, empty shell passing words through you. So we have to be embodied, and we have to choose to remember to bring our bodies back whole again. And that is not easy. So I'm going to be honest, it's not easy to feel all of what one has not been feeling. There's a reason we distract ourselves, because there's a lot of pain in there when we face what we've been able to avoid.
Can you do it without a sangha? Do you have to have community to? No.
You have to have community. You have to have community. Thank you for asking. You absolutely have to. I talk about this notion of like, we have to have our return to our own being and practice building the muscle of returning to our own being. But that goes into our, can go into our like dichotomous minds and binary minds, where we go, oh, my own being is like my own. And I'm like, no, it's not that kind of own. It's not possible without a relationship, without community, without sangha, without without, you know, this commitment and recognition of the integral relationship that we have with all others, all so-called others, without oneness, without a recognition of our oneness. It's
Yeah.
what inspires us to do it. Yeah.
I just got choked up. I think that's such powerful stuff. And the reason I got choked up is because you were speaking truth. This is very difficult labor, and we cannot do it without our Sangha, without community. And I flashed on all the powerful community I'm in. I mean, Angel, this past Wednesday night, we started a study of the book Caste with Ebenezer Baptist Church. And you know Ebenezer Baptist Church,
Yes,
and St. Luke's Episcopal Church. And there were 500 of us studying at the same time. And we were feeling the Sangha. We were feeling the community. And we prayed together, this cacophony of musicality at the very end that was just like the beloved community. And then smaller communities I'm having now. And then the other reason I got chucked up is because you and I are in Sangha.
Yes, we do. Yes.
I mean, that's so powerful.
Yeah. And you know, this is contrary to what has been written in this in the encoding of the DNA of this country. You know, the sort of rugged individualism. And so what I say to people is like, none of us learned white supremacy alone. We can't unlearn it alone. None of us learned, you know, none of us learned misogyny alone. We didn't learn all kinds of these corrupted human behaviors. We didn't learn them alone, so we cannot unlearn them alone.
Thank you, Angel. This has been heaven for me. It really has. Thank you so much.
It's so good to see you.
It's great to see you.
So good to see you. Yeah.
Until next time and our next learning and loving time together.
Okay. Let's make it soon.
Let's make it soon.
Yeah,
Thanks
thank
so much. Hang on just a second. Thank you, everybody, for being with us. What a thrilling moment. And we'll be playing this over and over and over again for quite a while. And please stay tuned. For next week, we will have another wonderful conversation. Goodbye.